Welcome to the safe space where we learn how to train and feed our dogs better. And today I have a highly requested topic yet again, where we're going to talk about the science behind dry or kibble versus raw, fresh feeding with the one and only Dr. Connor Brady. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Ross. Well, delighted to be here. Just love this stuff. Can't talk enough of it, so I'm chomping at the bit here to get going.
Yeah, it's going to be great. And so we're just going to jump in and then I'll do a little bit more of an introduction there
Yeah.
because I know people watching, they just get so eager. So, my first question for you is there science demonstrating that fresh or raw feeding dogs is superior compared to a dry or kibble diet?
There is, in short, there is absolutely. And before I even tuck into that, I often, I always want to kind of highlight that, you know, it is it's a strange kind of trait of the other side to ask for studies to prove that our food is correct. And I kind of feel if you're going to ask somebody that you need to have a few studies in your own pocket. It's in my opinion, as a kind of a I suppose an evolutionary biologist more than anything else, is that you're the one who left to this really strange product. And so I spent when I was 10 years writing that book, and I go looking for the studies that support that move. Where are the studies that you guys used that convinced you this was the better way to feed an animal? Where's the studies for high carb, high carbohydrate, high protein? Where are the dry versus raw fed dog studies? There must be a plethora of them, considering the entire veterinary industry has left. There must be a huge amount. Do you know how many there were when I started researching? Zero comparisons of dry v raw fed dogs. And yet this isn't a concern for them. And when we want to feed just normal food to pets, it's like, well, have you got studies to back you up? And it's like, why would I need studies? As it happens, the studies started coming in 2015. The first one was, we just were speaking about it before we turned on the camera there, Professor Anna Borgman in University of Helsinki in Finland. They have a group there called Dog Risk, 4 or 5 scientists plugging away, doing a few studies. And they did a few small investigative works in 2015. And that one then became a really big study in 2018. But what they found, real simple, what we've been looking for the whole time. They got 10 dogs on raw food and 10 dogs on dry food. Very simple. And they looked for this inflammatory marker called homocysteine. And in short, you want as little homocysteine in your blood as possible. It's not something you want a lot of. What they found was dry-fed dogs had 10 times the level of homocysteine in their blood than raw-fed dogs. We don't know why. We don't know if it was the high carbohydrates, poor quality fats, ultra-processed proteins, chemical preservatives, mycotoxins, all the stuff you could kind of have a dig at dry food about. But they were 10 times more inflamed. And then they changed the dogs from dry to raw food, and their inflammatory markers fell by a factor of 5. And when they changed the raw-fed dogs to dry food, the inflammatory markers rose by a factor of 5. That is a very, very convincing study. That is a really important finding. That was repeated again for inflammatory markers of the skin. We've got 2 studies now to show that pups born of dry-fed mothers are more likely to be atopic in the first year of their life. And recently on nature.com, the top website, they published a study saying that ultra-processed dry food increases gut conditions in dogs, and feeding normal diet doesn't. And there's a few other smaller works in there, but essentially 4 or 5 head-to-heads where real food, no matter what you call that, home cooked, cooking, a cooked product, but real food ingredients, certainly fresh or raw usually, is better for the dog. There's also less waste. There's a more balanced species richness of product. There's also more, there was studies showing there's more GABA, which is we'll talk about probiotics later on, but GABA is something that you want to have lots of coursing through your body, calms you down. So that in raw fed dogs. So we have a number of works that you could hit them with. The problem is when somebody asks you for that study, and I'm sorry for giving you such a long-winded
I
answer to
love
the
it.
question,
You
this is where
go.
it goes.
Yeah.
But the problem is when the person their position has been taken in dogma because they don't have at their disposal a heap of studies to counter with. They don't say, well, on that inflammatory note, they don't have anything to say about that. And so what happens is if you try to present studies to, let's say a vet, and they say, show us your studies, those studies will bounce off them like it was nothing. They'll just move along to the next issue, which is danger and safety, as if the stats are on their side there, which they're not. And so I often always have to caveat anytime we start talking about studies. I go, have you seen a lot of studies? I know what side you're on, so it's easier with you. But anytime a vet asks me that question, I'll say, okay, I'll play your game. We'll go study for study. How's that? And they always go, oh, well, yeah, no, you need to prove what you're doing is correct. And I said, no. I'm doing the same thing we've been doing for millions of years. You've jumped to this strange product. It's actually you that needs to produce that. That little flip that they've done, where we, the consumers, have to prove what we're doing is right, is something that's been around since cigarettes came out. So this was the ruse they used to keep cigarettes on the market. Prove cigarettes cause lung cancer. And it's like, well, it looks pretty convincing. You guys probably need to prove they don't cause lung cancer at this stage. But at this stage, companies were so big, they had so much money, it was like the consumers had to prove it. And then breast milk versus bottled milk. Nestle became the most boycotted company in the world for 20 years because they kept pushing the bottled milk was, better than breastfeeding. And of course, we, the consumers, had to prove it was not the case. Okay, it's still a great role for bottled milk. That's not the point. The point is, it's not. Nobody ever said it was better. We would never say a product was better than the real thing without studies. So it's the same thing over and over. Now it's pharmaceuticals. They bring out a new drug, and they say, and we have to prove that there's harm to that drug. So this is a problem that we have, where it's been a little bit of a flip. And it's on the consumers now to prove, with huge amounts of really good quality science, the stuff they didn't use to get this ridiculous product out on the market in the first place. So as a scientist and a researcher, I find it so frustrating that I'm the one that has to prove myself when, I'm not the one with the strange product in my hand, Anyway.
I love it. You took my hot topic and you went with it, and that was like right there was just gold. So
Yeah,
that was fantastic. And what's interesting to me, kind of tailing off of that, is Kibble's only been around for what, 100 years. So
yeah,
it's a
1950.
relatively new way of feeding our dogs. So my question always goes back to what were we feeding before Kibble was around, and it was real,
Yeah,
fresh human foods.
bits and bobs, leftovers, and bits of meat and that kind of thing. In fact, the first dog food was tins of meat, tins of horse meat. But in the 19, just after World War II, World War One was very tricky to find horses because we killed them all in the war. But then in World War II, same issue. We ran out of meat and we ran out of rations, and so in 1950, Kibble extrusion cooking was invented, and Ralston Purina said this might work for dry food, and they said, well, we don't have much meat, so we'll just use cereal. So the recipe that you're feeding today is almost identical to the recipe they were making in the 1950s. It was lots of cereal, a token meat addition, which has decreased to 3 or 4% now today, if you can believe it. 3 or 4% bone meal is your meat addition. So if it says with chicken or with beef, it's 3 or 4% meat and bone meal, which gardeners call bone meal because it's made of bones, because they don't send meat to the rendering plant. And so that token meat addition is nothing. So it's essentially a high plant carbohydrate diet with a George Jetson pill. It's been the same diet since the 1950s, and they pretend and talk a mean game. They move all the scientific words to the front and pictures of molecules, but I mean, there's more science in the packet than there is in the actual product itself.
Very true. So
Yeah.
on that note, what is one? We'll deep dive all of this, by the way, for those watching. I just love to give a little teaser in the beginning to keep you excited. What is one ingredient? What's one common or popular ingredient found in kibbles that is really alarming to you? Top of your head.
Oh, there's just so many.
I
Um,
know.
if I was in the US, okay, the most alarming ingredient for me would be meat meal, animal meal, meat and bone meal, where the animal's not specified. That would be the most alarming ingredient for me if I was in the US, because 2 out of 5 of your major rendering companies still take in cats and dogs today. And the presence of SPB, sodium pentobarbital, is the second most likely reason pet food gets recalled in the US, just behind salmonella. 70 times more salmonella, 70 times more dry food gets recalled for salmonella than raw dog food. Just so I'll drop that one in there. By weight, by tonnage, 70,000 tons of dry food per year in 2015, and was versus 1 ton of raw. Anyway, look, so this SPB, sodium pentobarbital, is a problem, and that's the chemical we use for euthanizing cats and dogs. And so these rendering companies that take in cats and dogs, that would be a major concern to me. Now, that sounds like a scare tactic, but listen, I have nothing to benefit by saying this stuff, but there is enormous links to like studies or articles in the LA Times during the late 90s of how many cats and dogs were being used in pet food. That's alarming stuff. So if I was talking about proper drama, that if it doesn't specify the animal that went into that, the animal fat, it must say chicken fat or beef fat. You can't just say animal fat. If it says animal fat, they don't know what animals went in. Could have been leftover restaurant grease, roadkill, cats or dogs. All those things are stewed up in your rendering plants. we had a big BSE scare over here, so we're not allowed to do that anymore. All we can render now in our plants is human grade meat and bone, heads and skulls and that kind of stuff. So that's what goes into everything else goes for incineration. So that's a proper alarming ingredient. But if you were to ask me over here, what is it? I would always just say high carbohydrates. These ultra processed diets that are high in rapidly digested carbohydrates, that's pure poison. So sugar, this is 50-60% sugar diet. Like, people think that pasta isn't sugar. Pasta is just a blink of an eye and it's sugar in the blood. Pasta, rice, potatoes, it doesn't have to look like granulated sugar. All those refined carbohydrates hit the blood very quickly. So your meat eater is eating 50-60% rapidly digested carbs. And so that sugar hits the blood and it's a poison. So insulin comes in to pack it into the fat stores, and you fuel all the diseases you're terrified about. Obesity, diabetes, pancreatitis, cancer, kidney disease. We know higher protein diets are better for kidney disease. Recently, epilepsy. Like, all are fueled by high carbohydrate diet. So if I was looking at my little pet going, oh, geez, buddy, I hope you don't get sick, I'd be thinking, what's the number one thing to stop feeding those dogs? 50-60% carbohydrates. That would be a very important first step for most people.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So you mentioned, now we're going to get into more of the deep dive, but I want to introduce you a little bit more. And you mentioned over here. So to clarify for those watching, you are in Ireland,
Oh, yeah.
and Dr. Connor Brady, he is best-selling author. Actually, have his book right now, right here, and I will have it linked down below. Studying a doctorate in nutrition, a pet food consultant, also an international speaker on canine nutrition and health, as well as dog trainer, which I think is really cool and interesting. And maybe we'll touch on that. I know we're
Yeah.
going to touch on behavior, and as well as a pet food manufacturer. But I think above all of that, you are what I would consider an extreme pet health advocate, and you are all over the interwebs sharing the information that you've learned over years and years and years of studying biology, science, nutrition. And we as pet parents are very grateful to you for that. And all of your information will be linked down below. So
Thanks.
let's jump into what is a species appropriate diet for dogs?
Yeah, like if you were going to do the zoo thing, if you were a zoologist, and it's like, okay, somebody's presented you with this animal with 6 legs and blue fur, and it's like, okay, you look after that, and your very first question would be, okay, what does it eat? And so you have 3 or 4 tools at your disposal to find out what they eat, and the very first one is diet studies. What do people tell you the dog eats? And so you go and have a look at the studies that have already been done. So diet studies are interested in dogs. If you let dogs off the lead, what do they go and eat? And it turns out that truly feral dogs, dogs that don't go near humans, weren't raised by them, they were raised out in the wild, they're highly carnivorous. Highly carnivorous. They'll eat anything with a face, they say. They're very exploitative, opportunistic predators, very low vegetation content. They don't go tucking into wheat fields and cornfields and stuff. That doesn't happen. So very, very meat eatery. The problem is the data is sullied a bit by the fact that an awful lot of dogs are raised by humans. So we have a lot of studies of village dogs living in poor areas like Zimbabwe, rural Italy, and a couple of places in Brazil. So Zimbabwe, did I say that already? So there's 3 or 4 places where there's an awful lot of kind of village dogs, and they cull those dogs to keep the population numbers down. They usually live in the dumps, and then they come back at nighttime and are fed scraps by their poorer families. And the reason I state the poorer bit is because poorer people don't waste too much meat on their dogs. They give them plant leftovers and whatnot. So what you find is that the dogs come back, they're fed porridge and sadsa and plant leftovers, and then they go out and they go hunting during the day to top up their failing protein reserves, as the Toy said. So the point is, we know that dogs will eat a bit more plant matter when they live with humans, and it turns out, studies from the 1960s, some lady had 100 chow chow pups. Imagine what that looked like. Imagine a warehouse full of 100 chow chow pups. Surely the cutest animal on the planet. And she divided them into 3 groups, and she had a third of them on a plant-based diet, a third of them on a meat and bone diet, and a third of them on a mix. And what she found was the dogs that just ate vegetarian food, after 5 months of age, it's called the imprinting period for any of the nerds out there. Any of the dog trainers will know that period really importantly. Can't teach an old dog new tricks. It's not quite right, but you can get an awful lot done in the first 5 months, and then it kind of drops off after that critical period. But it's the same with feeding. So if you want your dog to eat a varied diet, it's got to be done in the first few months of his life. So this is why dogs are a little bit reluctant to eat a tomato, as anybody would be later on in life, or a chicken breast. They'll go, oh, that texture is odd, But if they've been fed a varied diet, they'll eat anything later in life. So the vegetarian bit is interesting because you'll see videos of cats online eating broccoli, trying to eat it with their incredibly carnivorous face. And people say, you see, she loves broccoli. And it's like, well, you've shown her to eat broccoli. That doesn't mean it's any good for her. She's just eating it because you've told her to eat it and she thinks it's food. So this is the big part of the vegetarian diet drama that we're having at the moment. People thinking, well, my dog loves vegetables. Look, he looks so healthy. And I'll go, well, smokers look healthy. That doesn't mean anything. So that's the story with the diet. The diet studies scream that the dog is a carnivore. He came from a long line of carnivores. Wolves and whatnot, very carnivorous animals. Yes, they have their moments when they eat a few plants. They might eat a little bit of ripe fruit, but day to day, very carnivorous animals. Then you look at the biology of the dog, ultra carnivorous. I mean, everything about him, short, little, fast, digestive tract, very acidic. I mean, look at his mouth. It just snaps open and close, snap. There's no sideways move. We grind side to side to crunch down plant forage. Theirs don't. They just slam down, chop up and down. That's a carnivore's mouth. What makes you think that's? Name me an omnivore whose mouth only opens and closes. So it just doesn't exist. It's a very carnivorous, and they've got these huge carnivore teeth at the back. They're called carnasal teeth. No omnivores have them. They're giant carnasal teeth for shearing meat and bone. So the teeth don't actually join at the back. They side past each other like that for chopping meat and bone. That's why you don't dogs can actually, you don't want them to slam their jaws closed too quickly when they're eating big hard bones. Yeah.
So
What was I say?
what do we say to the veterinarians? And there's a large community of them that will try to tell me and the viewers in my community that dogs are omnivores because they have evolved to digest plant matter, high carb diets, kibble.
Yeah. So when they talk about that, they always address the study in 2013 by Axelsson, which is a Swedish study. It's been repeated since. And what they found, very interestingly, was that dogs have taken some tiny steps towards carbohydrate digestion. They digest carbs a little bit better than cats. They have hepatoglucanase, which is cats don't, true carnivores don't. They have taken these tiny little evolutionary steps towards omnivory. That's a fact. They definitely have. They wouldn't be as a cats are considered these obligate carnivores. They just eat meat and bone. And then this word omnivore. So it's almost like you've got carnivore on one end of the scale and you've got herbivore on the other. And in the middle of all that is omnivore. And so in the vet's mind, if you can prove that the dog has taken a tiny couple of steps towards omnivory, you can feed him a plant-based diet. You can go all the way over the other side, which is like saying a European red fox, he's an omnivore. He eats about 80% animal matter, but he's an omnivore. And then you've got a black bear, American black bear. He's an omnivore, but he only eats about 20% animal matter and largely vegetation. So you can feed one like the other, but it won't be good long term. The higher quality food in the bear will rot because he'll hold onto it too long because his intestines are too long. And similarly, if you feed a fox like a bear a high vegetation diet, he'll eventually starve because he needs a higher meat protein diet. So to say he's an omnivore, therefore we're going to feed him a vegan diet is nonsense. There's a whole big line, a whole scale. So dogs are taking these tiny steps at the genetic level. Darwin would have given his teeth to see this tiny step. And what happened was dogs evolved beside farmers for 6,000 years. And the breeds that evolved beside farmers were fed more carbohydrates than the other wild counterparts. And so actually, yes, they turned onto carb digestion ever so slightly more. But the best response to this was by Doug Newman. And he said, just because I can digest ethanol and sucrose doesn't mean my diet can be rum and cookies, can it? I mean, just because you can digest carbohydrates, cats can digest carbohydrates. I mean, the same industry will say cats are obligate carnivores, and yet they sell Kibble carbohydrate-based dry food.
Right.
So the argument that they bring to the table is nonsensical because they're first of all breaking it for cats. If you think that's an obligate carnivore, feed them a meat-based diet then. But they'll still feel them like an omnivore. So it's just so there's so much to cover in these studies. Also, animals like huskies, akitas, they didn't extrapolate out this gene, and they're still feeding them kibble diets, high carbohydrate diets. So what's the excuse then? So yes, they've taken these tiny steps. So I don't mind a bit of carbohydrates in dogs. If you want to put in, you've got a potato left over or whatever, I feed everything to my dog. Absolutely, I wouldn't even think a second about it. But to say that therefore we feed them 60% refined carbohydrates, which we know is twice the amount humans should be eating, or we get proper sick, proper quick. Why would dogs eat twice the amount? Oh, because they're omnivores. I mean, do you recommend that for humans? Do you think that's a suitable diet for humans? It's nonsense. It's so frustrating.
Yeah. So what about when we think about food versus nutrients and we think about one thing that many conventional veterinarians will argue on my platforms will be, well, okay, fine, I agree that dogs should have high protein diets, but they can get the protein from these legumes or gluten. I know your thoughts on this,
Mm.
or these other non-animal meat sources. How do we combat that?
Oh, it's so annoying. It's like you're trying to do absolutely everything but feed the dog as normal food. It's like, what are we talking about gluten for? Why are we talking about soy? This is not material that these unfortunately we have a discussion going on about meat, okay? And we say, okay, we've got this carbon footprint that people are worried about now, carbon, carbon, carbon. Now, as it happens, a grass-fed cow, and this is not the conversation now, just check out Joel Salatin's online, go to YouTube, learn something, and I can recommend many, many books, which I can pass on later on to Rach. But a grass-fed cow is not a carbon issue at all. They're in a cycle. They're eating huge amounts of grass. They're pooing that grass back into the soil. They're building soil. Okay, so if anything, they're a sequestrian of carbon, and then you get to eat the cow at the end. So that's a marvelous machine. Yes, the cow farts. Yes, it emits some carbon, but it's sucking in huge amounts of grass. Grass is the quickest way to take carbon out of the atmosphere. Anyway, I don't want to get into that. The problem is we have very strangely reared cattle in CAFOs, and they are carbon producing machines. We feed them grain, which cows aren't supposed to eat, which makes huge amounts of methane and salmonella, E. coli issues in our food chain as a result. They are a heavy carbon footprint. So the argument is dogs shouldn't be eating meat to save the planet, as if the dogs are the issue. So this is my first bone of contention with it. And second of all, dogs need meat because there's loads of nutrients in meat that aren't in all these plant-based proteins. So they supplement them into the diet. But we know studies of these supplements, particularly mineral and amino acid supplements and whatnot, they're crap compared to the real McCoy. Your body doesn't like stuff from a conical flask. It knows the difference. It wants its nutrients bound up in food and with fiber and whatnot. So we've got like natural phosphorus, no problem on the kidneys. Phosphates, big problem for kidneys. The veterinary community say all phosphorus is bad for kidneys. This is not true. We've got this calcium phosphorus ratio that we have to be careful of if you're feeding the raw dog food. No, you don't. What is the calcium phosphorus ratio for your kid? Oh, I don't know. Well, tell me their RDA of calcium. I don't know. You don't know how much calcium. Where do you get your calcium? I don't know. I don't know. And I said, well, let me tell you, you're a terrible parent. We do not apply these things to our own nutrition for a reason, because that's not how you eat. It's nonsense. But they pretend that these things are really, really important for our dogs. It's just, it's just another one that you could go on about quite a long
Yeah,
time.
it feels like it's a way to scare pet parents like myself to feel that we can only feed these
Yeah,
bags of complete and balanced
yeah,
kibble.
yeah,
And that's what is, and it's interesting you bring up, feeding your kids because, we're not talking about DIY raw diets right now per se, but I find this whole creating your own food or cooking your own food at home for your dogs is interesting because there are some schools of thought where it's like every meal needs to be perfectly balanced, whatever that means. But then I often think to myself, I've never, and my degree is in nutrition science for humans, I've never sat down at a meal for whether it's one meal or for a whole week and thought, is this complete and balanced for me?
no,
And so I think that that's interesting that there's such this pressure for our dogs. And I'm not advocating for incomplete balanced diets.
yeah,
It's interesting. You and actually Dr. Ian Billinghurst sound very similar when you talk about it. That what he was saying is that dogs are able to their digestive and system and their biological system is forgiving, and that you can feed it crap, for lack of a
yeah,
better term, and they can live to a long age, but it may not mean that they're thriving, and it
yeah,
may not mean, like, one example I get a lot of pet parents will say, well, my dog ate old Roy kibble, and lived to 15 years old. And
yeah,
kind of my thought on that is the dog probably genetically was predisposed to probably live longer, one, and two, their digestive system was probably able to extract and digest and absorb the nutrients maybe more efficiently than another dog. But
yeah,
heck, what if we would have fed that dog a fresh food diet?
yeah.
Could it have lived as long as Bobby to 30 years old?
Yeah, I think the single examples of anything mean absolutely nothing. I've got a 94-year-old obese alcoholic chain smoking granny. What does that tell you about those conditions? We've got plenty of obese people that make it to their 90s. Is that the norm? No. Not if you're obese, it isn't. If you are obese, you're probably not going to make your 90s. Some do, and you can't hold up those examples as anything because we know that this, unfortunately, is a very unhealthy condition to be in. And so it's the same with any disease, but particularly smoking. I always say that about smoking. There's plenty of smokers that get away with it. About half of them do. Half of
Yeah.
smokers get away with it and don't really suffer the major drama that is smoking, but the other half have a big, big problem. And so you have a 50-50 chance of taking a terrible bullet there. And so are you going to hold up the 50% that do well? That's what the smoking industry did. So single examples of anything mean absolutely nothing. It's what happens when you compare 1,000 of them to another 1,000. What happens when if the vets opened up their books, okay, and had a look at their dry fed dogs versus raw fed dogs? How many times did they go to the vets? How many times did they buy steroids? You know, the skin conditions and gut conditions that we know are improved by feeding normal food. You could have the answer in 2 days. You know, so Mars Banfield owns 50,000 vets in the US. Do you not think that they would be bringing out dry versus raw fed studies now to show how good their food is? I mean, of course they would. They have all the data in the world, and they would absolutely sell all their products overnight. But they don't. Those studies do not come out. There is no study showing dry food is good. So yeah, that is a problem. And the complete and balanced is nonsense. I mean, there's no complete and balanced food for humans. You know, we nearly made one with baby formula, but it wasn't as good as breast milk. We have to now say, if you choose to follow, go on, this is a suitable alternative. And so it used to be this replaces breast milk, which they're still pushing in poor countries. So, you know, but there is no complete food. Nutrients come in variations in nature over time. You don't get complete meals every day. Some days you're eating a rabbit, other days you got nothing, other days you got a carcass, other days you got a huge amount of salmon for 2 weeks. You know, nutrients come. Our bodies have evolved to make the nutrients that we need every single minute of the day. Our bodies make them themselves. That's why you've got essential amino acids and non-essential. So the essential ones you've got to be eating. But, you know, they come in time. We store stuff in our livers and fat and all sorts of things. You know, you don't need it every day. You eat pizza for a day. You know, you go out with the lads for 3 days. You look back at your diet going, oh my God, I need to eat a salad. You know, that's just the way it is. We went through school. What did you eat when you were in college? I mean, the diets we had in college were just terrible.
So bad.
So bad. I mean, it was so nice, but just so bad. Pure dirt. And you know that, and drinking for 4 years. And what did that do to my sports? Nothing too bad. I still did okay in sports. You know, so it's just we fuss about it in dogs way too much. It's fear, as you said, and it's to make you feel that you need to pick up that bag. And your vet too. Your vet's afraid too. Because, you know, you might get it wrong and the dog's butt will fall off for a nutrient that you can't even pronounce. You know, just nonsense, absolute nonsense.
And you actually talk about, I wasn't planning on going to this too much, but you talk about it in your book about uh, veterinarians and the essentially lack of nutritional education they get during vet school. And I don't say that to shame veterinarians by any means. I'm friends with many conventional vets
Yeah.
that are that will admit, and even holistic vets that went to veterinarian school, and they'll admit we had one class, maybe even just one singular class or even a full series course, but that's it for the whole program. And then they go on to tell me that it was funded by one of these big pet foods. And then the one thing I'll say on that is they get a lot of pushback sometimes of like, oh, well, your course was funded by Purina or Royal Canin or
Mm.
Mars. And then the conventional vets, generally speaking, when there's these heated debates, will come back and say, well, yes, but these big companies that did these studies on the efficacy of whatever science diet, they spend so much money on that because they care about our pets' health.
Mm. Ooh. Oh, you're baiting me here.
I am. I know
You
exactly
are.
how to
So, like, okay, first of all, definitely we are not having digs at conventional vets. The vets that we meet at the coalface, these guys, these kids, you know, when they start off, the hardest university degree you can imagine. Over here, you need to get full points in the leaving. It's the same as actuary, which is the very top thing to do in college over here, way higher than medicine. So hard thing to get into. You have to work hard in school. You have to work hard in university. And it's not just one animal you have to work with. I mean, look at these lazy GPs we have just looking after humans. A vet has to look after every animal on the planet, apparently. Birds and fish and rats and rabbits and cats and dogs and cows and horses. Master of all the animals. And not just one little bit of it. All aspects of them, you know, genetics and biology and surgery and anesthesiology and every ology you can think of, you know, and then you release them after just 4 years because, you know, they can get all what should take you a lifetime to learn they can do in 4. And then off you go and run a practice and have staff and do your books and all this, you know, and have a family. And it's like you're supposed to stay on top of the literature that's coming in. You haven't a hope. And so vets can say all they want that they studied nutrition in college, but you can just say, okay, where'd you go to college? And you can check. And it's just not on the courses. There is a pharmacological use of vitamin C for when you're sick because they don't put vitamin C in dry food. Can you believe it? Dogs can make their own vitamin C when they're healthy. When they're not healthy, they don't make any vitamin C. When does your dog need vitamin C? When he's unhealthy. You're not going to get it on dry food. And
Right.
you wonder why they go around eating plants and poo and all sorts of things when they're dry fed and sick. So yeah, the nutritional stuff, it's just not being taught in college. They can say what they want. It's just nonsense. Nobody believes it. And if you want to find out, the quick way to find out who sponsors what colleges, you just ring the college and ask them what food they sell in the foyer. So if they sell Royal Canin, they're sponsored by Mars. If they sell Hill's Pet Food, they're sponsored by Colgate Palmolive. So that's how you know why your vet is selling that dry food. So yeah, like that is that is an industry issue. That's not an individual vet issue. Okay, they honestly believe that they're helping you, keeping you away from the dangers of fresh food. They honestly believe that, so you could say, well, you should have been studying up, it's your job, but I have a great lot of sympathy because these guys are phenomenal. When something goes wrong, my dog
Yeah.
gets smashed by a car, I'm not going to be feeding it herbs, I'm going to the vet.
Yeah.
So, and that's all. So I don't have any time for people slagging off the vets in that respect. It's the industry above them that allow the lessons that we're hearing, these regular flea treatments for dogs with no fleas, wormers for dogs with no worms, when we can get the poo checked for $10, annual vaccinations when they've already been vaccinated properly for viruses every year. Show me a single study that shows that's a good idea. Not one. Every 3 years is what Wasava is begging vets to do. Do they do it? No, they still give them every year. So we have major problems with the information that's coming out of the industry, but that is not the vet's fault, at the coalface. So yeah, I do want to make that point straight away. Yeah, there was a second part to what you said there, but I can't remember what it is because I just went off and
Okay, so then feedback I'll get, because there are some studies that talk about the benefit of some of these big pet foods, the dry foods, the
oh yeah.
Royal Canins, the Science Diets, the Hills. And some veterinarians or some people in the industry even will say, well, the reason that there's so much studies, or the reason that they fund vet schools, is because they care about the pets. And I
Mm,
think that is, it sounds a bit like brainwashing to me, because I mean, you can just look at these big pet food companies and see that it is profit and money driven.
mm,
And not to say that when it first started that maybe there wasn't desire to help our pets, but
yeah.
it is something that, I definitely strongly believe that it's evolved to be definitely more profit driven. And I can say that confidently because I look at the ingredients and I look at the nutrient profiles, and I look at how low the protein is and how it's extruded. And it's really hard for me to look at that and go, this is biologically appropriate for all, this is best for all dogs.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a huge amount in that. So yeah, absolutely, they do fund studies. They do create studies. One example is Mars produced a study. They let dogs feed ad lib, and they say, right, dogs, you eat what you want. Eat as much protein, fat, and carbs as you like. And the dogs ate 7% carbs. Name me a Mars dry food that's 7% carbs. None. So they had the results of that study. Did they act on it? Hell no. They still kept their carbohydrate content up high. So that's the first thing. Second of all, the really important studies are not being done. It's just when they say, oh, well, they're doing these studies, go, what studies are you talking about? You're talking about studies, you're talking about data. Let me see it. I mean, surely the number one study would be comparing your product to a normal fed dog, and it does better for some reason. What the studies that these guys do is a lesson in marketing. Okay, the studies that these guys churn out, because I have looked at every single one of them as much as I could. The Wasava, which is this, or the small I'm saying Wasava now because we were just talking
I
about
know we were just
the
talking.
small animal clinical nutrition. It's an
Yeah.
enormous book of studies that the dry food industry produced. Okay, and you say, okay, let's go to this book when you're looking for evidence for why you're feeding them high carbohydrate diets. Going to be lots in here because this is an awful lot of carbohydrates. And the section on the carbohydrate requirements of dogs is a paragraph. It's a paragraph in a book that has 1,500 pages, thousands and thousands of studies, and there's a single paragraph of why some dogs might need carbohydrates. And those two studies, probably from the 1950s or 60s, were just nonsense studies. In what they did was they allowed dogs to eat really high carbohydrate diets or really high fat diets and bred them and see what happens. And it turns out when bitches were on really high fat diets, not as many pups survived. So therefore, they need really high carbohydrate diets. And I'm like, where's the really high protein fed dogs? Where's that? So you can get any answer you want. This is why science is completely adulterated at the moment. What they produce at the moment, for example, the calcium phosphorus ratio, they will convince your vets why it's so important because their studies show that you have to get the calcium phosphorus ratio perfect, or you'll have structural issues in your pet. And that's correct. If you're talking about dry fed dogs, it is, because they're using calcium carbonate and phosphates, two crap minerals. You've got to nail that. If you're going to produce that food, you need to make sure it's perfect. The minerals clash with each other. So what they do is they produce, they're called unfalsifiable comparisons. Take, for example, Magic Dermal Care, prescription pet food sold to you 3 times the price of their regular crap. And what they do is, and this is exactly the study, 20 dogs on their regular standard dry food and 20 dogs on the same regular standard dry food, but this one has a fish oil tablet in it. And what they find after a month is the second group getting the fish oil tablet have slightly less itch. Boom, Magic Dermal Care. This is now clinically proven to reduce itch in your dogs. Isn't that amazing? Science. And it's like, so now it's clinically proven to reduce itch in dogs. And then my first question is, who'd you compare it to? Because I know the tricks. Whereas your vet's going, well, look, it reduces itch. I said, it reduces, it's like putting a drop of fish oil on a big massive pack of M&Ms and feeding them to kids. It's the same tricks that are used in kids' breakfast cereals. The crap that, I was going to say brand, high sugar, color, disgusting things, the worst possible start in the day. The same companies make those foods and sell them to your kids, sell them to you to feed them to your kids. And they put in a bit of fiber or a bit of iron, now with added iron. And it's like, now this terrible, dangerous shit is ever so slightly less, excuse my language, ever so slightly less dangerous. And now it's good for kids. No, they're both terrible options. But if I had to choose, yes, okay, bloody hell, give me the bit of zinc while I fight off obesity and diabetes, and poor attention spans. So these are the
Tell me how you really feel.
Yeah. No, I haven't had a drink yet. But like, this is it's late over here, by the way, guys. It's not like I'm at it during the day. Yeah, so the studies they come out with, because I've gone, look, the protein is the worst one, and that is a subject that we can talk to a whole other day. But why dogs feed, as you alluded to there, low protein. People believe that the 18-20% protein, whatever, on the back of the pack is the optimum amount of protein for a dog. That is the minimum you're allowed feed in dry food, and say it adheres to AFCO, which is this magic, dry group of dry food people. And so you're feeding the minimum amount of protein to your dog. And as you also said, what is that protein? Because they add in corn gluten pulp, beet pulp, and you're thinking, wow, that doesn't sound too digestible. Yeah, because it's not. Soybean hulls. Why do they put that stuff in there? To boost the protein content of the food. It doesn't matter, it's not available to the dog. So Krogdahl et al. In 2016 studied 4 top veterinary products, including Royal Canin, all puppy products, and they hit all the Purina, they hit all the top brands, and they took the 4 puppy foods, and they all had 22% protein, the minimum you're allowed to feed a pup, and expect normal growth over 6 months. Not the optimum. The optimum is probably raw dog food. This is the minimum. And he analyzed it with his chemistry kit, and they found that 25% of the protein wasn't digestible. So now your 22% protein figure becomes 15.5, 16% protein, which is deficient in protein. Try growing a normal frame on that. Good luck. But who cares? The studies and the in-house trials that they pretend to do to prove these studies are complete are absolute nonsense. You would never get away with a human product, which is why we don't have these terms in human stuff. So to say they have studies is to highlight that you're not reading them, because anybody that tried to read them would never say that, because my instant answer will be, show them to me. Show me what you're talking about. Show me the study, which today, unfortunately, we are in the position where people just have facts. You don't need science anymore. You just need to be convincing. And so you say your facts. You don't need data. You don't need evidence. You don't need anything. All you need is a microphone. Because I don't have to show you anything. I'm the one with the microphone. So this is the same thing we have with pharmaceuticals and foods and everything. It's just facts are given, but they're never backed up, because when you go looking for them, they're not there. Nonsense. It's just fugazi,
Yeah.
Anyway.
It's definitely it's a really confusing time for pet parents, because we're at this weird shift in the pet industry, pet food, pet parent world, where we as pet parents are more researched more than ever before. We're more concerned with our pets' health and longevity than ever before. And there's more marketing out there, not even just in the form of these big pet foods, but also from veterinarians that have big social media accounts, or vet techs or vet nurses sharing a lot of different information. And so it's really difficult and challenging to navigate that.
Yeah.
And I know that because I get DMs and emails and comments every day of like, well,
Yeah.
either my vet in person or a vet I follow online says, oh, feeding raw is going to kill your dog, is really, really tough. So I have a lot of
Yeah.
empathy for pet
Yeah.
parents
Yeah.
out there, because it
Yeah.
is tough. But I think it's interesting we talk about studies, but to your point, I love how you call fresh food or raw food normal food. Because when have we needed studies to prove or validate us as humans the need to eat real healthy meats, real healthy vegetables, fresh fruits,
Yeah,
avocado? Like,
yeah.
imagine if your physician told you you need to eat cereal, which is basically what kibble is,
Mm,
fortified grains, um, for the rest of your life because it has all the vitamins built into it. And God forbid you eat any fruits or vegetables with that because we would need
yeah,
proof. It's a very
yeah.
similar parallel,
Yeah,
wouldn't you say?
yeah, definitely, yeah, and it'd be even worse if, like, say, he was wearing a Cheerios T-shirt and he was
Yeah.
saying, "You must eat Cheerios."
Yeah.
No offense to Cheerios, I'm sure it's incredible, but, that's the like, it's even it is that it's that bad. It's like,
Yeah.
he's got Cheerios on his pen and Cheerios staplers and, his veterinary nurse is coming in Cheerios sneakers and Cheerios all over the clinic, and it's like, "Well, what food do you recommend?" He's like, "Well, Cheerios. Cheerios is the best." "And where'd you go to college?" "I went to Cheerios University in Cheerio land." And it's like, okay, right. And would you think any maybe eggs would be good for breakfast? Oh, absolutely not. No, that would mean you would eat less Cheerios. So, like, it's just it's so ridiculous, and yet we believe this. We think that, and I think is like you said, a fear keeps it in place, and I
Yeah.
totally sympathize with people because not everybody's going around studying this stuff. I mean, me and you are nerds for this kind of stuff, and we enjoy digging in, and but not everyone has that. It's like, bloody, I just want to feed my dog, lads. Can you relax on all the stuff and just, tell us what to do? So yeah, so it's hard if you the worst way to get people out of that fear hole is to use fear. So I don't ever try and bombard them with stats or anything. I now all I ever do is just talk up the real stuff and go, look, guys, if you're feeling afraid, which they definitely are at the start, less so in Ireland and the UK. I believe the UK is now dominating for with raw feed. Is 25% of their dogs are raw fed now. I mean, they're booting along way ahead of Ireland, and way ahead of the US, and now ahead of Australia. So it was Australia, now it's the UK. But now the way to get people onto it is it's like, it's like giving out crack. It's just going to, not that I have, it'd be like, pop an egg. You can pop an egg on top of your kibble, can't you? It's
Yeah.
like, oh, you can eat eggs. Yeah, you can eat eggs. Enjoy yourself. Well, can you have it raw? Because I'm worried about feeding raw. Okay, scramble it up then. If you want to cook an egg for your dog every day, go for it. Better if it's fresh, but scramble it up if you like. Who doesn't like scrambled eggs? So nutritious. Talk about complete food. And then, they come back to you and you say, what about a tin of sardines now? Could you do a tin of, and they like sardines, do they? Yeah. And, cats like sardines too, do they? And suddenly you're feeding them sardines in fresh water. Delicious. There's some fresh omega-3, because if you're feeding dry food, you have to add omega-3 to that, because all you have is a heap of plant oil in that food. And very studies show 1 in 4 of those dry foods have zero EPA, DHA. Zero. That is dynamite for talk about skin conditions. So you need to add those. So I kind of hook them in that way now. If they're afraid, I find that the fear is kind of less now. It's more people are coming, they're looking for the information. God bless social media. And so they're just looking for info, and you direct them and off they go. You've got these companies making complete cooked foods and raw foods, so that's going to help. There's a bit of a selection there. A lot of them are AFCO and FEDIAF compliant, which makes your vet feel a bit better to say, okay, well, if they're AFCO compliant. And so I think it's kind of happening quicker. And I think the fear, it used to be that they talked about nutrition, by the way. They don't anymore. Now all they talk about is hazardous microbiology, as if their product is clean in that respect, which we don't need to get into, if but it's just so yeah, the fear thing, it's a pity, but fear is always the driver of the market. It's always fear you look stupid if you don't wear this makeup, fear you look fat if you don't wear this t-shirt, fear you will smell
Yeah.
bad, fear you'll look ugly if you don't buy this car, fear you'll be sick if you don't take this drug, fear, and it always ends up in you buying products, whereas actually you're supposed to be eating stuff that grows in your backyard. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I
Yeah,
think so. And I think that's a good segue into what are some of your, and again, let's go back to the basics a little bit. Some of your favorite ways to feed dogs. We talked about raw feeding, which some people watching this may not even know what that is. So maybe talk a second about that and versus gently cooked and maybe even freeze dried, just a little high
yeah.
level on that.
Yeah, all those are great. Anything that you kind of think, yeah, there's kind of whole ingredients in this. So
Right.
to start off on a scale of 1 to 10, the first rung on that ladder, believe me, is cereal-based pet food. I've nothing to gain by telling you that, but it's the very last product I'd feed, and that's high wheat or corn-based dry food with chicken or with beef, which means no meat, just all grain, plant ingredients, plant filler, plant oils, and a George Jetson Mill or something. Terrible quality food. I wouldn't waste a penny on it. It's twice the price of fresh chicken off the shelf at the supermarket. Don't waste your money. The very kind of minimum dry food I'd go for would be like a cold pressed dry food. And as the name suggests, they process it a bit less. They use less heat. They use more pressure. And so the quality of the product can stay up there a bit. They tend to use a bit more meat. They tend to be a bit more natural. It's 50% of the US pet food market at the moment is cold pressed, natural. Grain free is in there as well. And there was a big drama over grain free causing heart
Oh,
conditions, which the FDA waded into and helped the cereal based dry food sector out, and said it was grain free. And they have now stepped back and said that wasn't the case, which is incredible timing considering Mars just bought Champion Pet Food, the biggest grain free pet food producer in the world. Total coincidence. So, there is 500,000 cases of DCM every year in the US, 500,000 in dogs every year. And the FDA pretended that there was 600 cases that they found, and they named the companies involved, which they didn't do during the melamine scandal when tens of thousands of dogs were being killed. They wouldn't tell the owners which cereal-based pet food companies were involved. So anyway, that's a little bit of darkness there. So cold pressed pet food, grain-free pet food, and know that food isn't great. It'll do the job fine. It's a step up, but to that you really need to be adding stuff. Your tins of sardines, your eggs, your table scraps, fresh meat, bit of beef mince, all lovely stuff. Anything you can add into that, a bag of frozen mussels or a bit of yogurt or anything, but particularly meaty stuff, they will benefit immensely from. Don't worry about throwing it out of balance and all that nonsense. It's just rubbish. So that's a decent start there. Cold pressed food or grain free, and add in your own stuff. Best before, not bad after meat. Whatever you can afford, just do your best. That's fine. The next step up would be, like, as you were mentioning, dried foods, dehydrated. It was real looking food, and they sucked all the water out of it. So these are usually quite pricey, freeze dried pet food. So countries with big standing armies in the US, UK, France, they produce an awful lot of freeze dried foods because that's what the armies are fed on. So that is a wonderful way of preserving foods. Freeze drying is just an incredible process. It preserves the food almost perfectly. It looks a bit tiny, which is a bit sad for a Labrador, and he's presented with a little few bits of freeze dried.
yeah.
So people try to rehydrate it, but then it looks like a bit like porridge. It's like, it's
Yeah.
not quite like the picture. So you're spending huge amounts of money on this, but it's, from a nutritional point of view, it's excellent, really good quality food. I would say you're paying for it. So raw feeders generally lean on freeze dried when they're going camping or something, because I'm not hauling around a heap of meat for the dog for 2 weeks in my camper van. So that is, the freeze dried has a place. It's fantastic. Why not? There's great products out there. Ziwi Peak, Origin before it was owned now by Mars. So there's a few of these products out there, and good luck to them. Some of them are better than others, and I would say you're getting close to a pretty good quality food there, and adding meat to that would be great, or raw meaty bone for lunchtime, fantastic. And then you get to up the top of the ladder, and you're talking about like cooked foods, but they're clearly made on good ingredients, where it says we used this meat, this is how much chicken is in it, chicken gizzards, chicken hearts, liver. They've used all the bits and pieces, different types of local veg. They're using the words that you think, yeah, that actually makes sense. And you're looking at it, and it's been lightly cooked. Okay. And if you talk to the company, you look at the website, they're saying all the right things. Dogs need meat. We put in a bit of veg. Here's some benefits, a couple of cool oils. That's kind of good stuff. And to that, I would also add real food, because it needs to be fresh. They've cooked it, great. But you need to add some fresh stuff. And then at the top then is raw dog food, whether you make it yourself, or buy in complete raw dog foods where the companies have already made it up for you and ground it all up. And they've checked the micro, and they've made sure it's clean and safe. I still wouldn't eat it myself raw, but I'm not a dog. So you would feed the raw to your dog the same way dry food comes from a bag on the floor, and raw dog food comes from the bottom shelf of your fridge, where all raw meat should be handled. Kids don't play with raw meat. Everyone that handles raw meat understands that. So when you start feeding raw meat to your dog, there was an enormous study out of Helsinki University and another one out of New York. 14,500 responses in Helsinki, which is just an enormous survey, detailing tens of thousands of dogs and millions of pet meals. Because it was like, have you ever had sickness from your pet food or salmonella in your house or whatever? And they found it to be incredibly safe to be feeding fresh and raw dog food to the dog. And almost the exact same figure was found in New York, with 6,000 responses. So Nikki did that study. So it seems to be a very safe thing to do. So all this worry that people are poisoning themselves and their kids and all this sort of stuff, we're not seeing it. There's hundreds of vets. We're not seeing these issues that conventional vets are scared about, because we're careful, we're educated, we know how to handle meat, and you're using good quality raw dog food companies that, people are watching them. Believe me, the dry food companies aren't letting them away with a thing. So And imagine how hard it is to produce good, clean, quality raw dog food when like your chicken chain is allowed to have salmonella in it. Can you
Yeah.
imagine how hard it is to produce a good quality product? Recently, Darwin, which is a top raw dog food, were caught. You know, how do I say it? It was announced recently there that they were using something to keep the microbiology down, and so I think I'm not surprised
Yeah.
because if you're going to
There's
have a
a lot of pressure on those
lot of
brands,
pressure,
and yeah,
yeah,
it's a really tough place for them to be,
yeah,
and there is a lot of kind of pushback from a lot of veterinarians, right? Like, I'm worried about salmonella. I'm worried about, I mean, when my mom got her dog 2 years ago, 3 vets in our town refused to see him as a just standard client because he's raw fed, and they said it was a liability to their staff. 3.
mm, mm. That's not
Yeah.
good, is it?
No.
Yeah, you hear that. I always like to say, from 2006 to 2016, there's been 132 cases of humans getting salmonella from pet food. 132 cases in the literature from 2006 to 2016. How many were from dry food? Every
All
single
of
one.
them.
Every single one of them. So to say there wasn't any raw dog food companies in that time was nonsense. There were 3 or 4 huge ones, but everyone feeding fresh food to pets, super, whatever. 132 people were poisoned by dry pet food. Half of them were toddlers under 2 years of age. Has your vet ever warned you about the dangers of dry pet food? No. Have they ever told you it's recalled 70 times more than fresh dog food? No. They've never. Have they ever told you it contains salmonella? No. It contains meat, doesn't it? Where do you think the salmon? Do you think salmon doesn't live on that? It uses the poorest quality meat, and you think it's bacteria free. Studies of dry food, when they're randomly selected and sent to laboratories, show that they have mega problems themselves as well, and it's not just salmonella. So while they point the finger at raw dog food and say, "Look how dangerous you're being," when you think about it, raw dog food is the canary in the coal mine, because if they're finding bacteria in their food, it's your bloody food chain you should be cleaning up. But like the fact that fresh meat may contain some hazardous bacteria, is that a reason not to feed fresh meat? Because think about it. 1 in 7 Americans go to see their doctor every year for food poisoning. 1 in 7. And the top causes of salmonella, listeria, and E. coli in America is fresh fruit and vegetables. I was like, what? I thought I was going to say eggs or meat. No, they're number 4, 5, and 6 on the list. So fresh fruit and vegetables are the top reasons you're going to get salmonella, E. coli, and listeria in the US. Is that a reason not to feed fresh fruit and vegetables? No. It's a reason to question your food sources and go, what is going on in our food chain? It's filthy. I mean, is this a good idea to raise cattle in this way? No. Devastating for the environment, devastating for the welfare of the cow, and devastating for the people trying to eat the meat. It's crap. It's not good stuff. Grass-fed cattle is the way you're supposed to do it. But small farmers, we can't have them. We've got to have big mega companies that take all the money. So these are big problems we're having. And to say that we have to have zero bacteria in the food chain, it's just nonsense. It's just nonsense. You're supposed to be eating off the grass, for God's sake. So this idea of battling the bugs and all this nonsense, that was the 20th century, guys. Forget about it, okay? Antibiotics are failing, okay? We have filthy meat chain that we're pumping full of antibiotics, and now we've got antibiotic-resistant bacteria, and they're going to blame us for asking for our antibiotics from the doctors too often. Ads on the radio, stop taking antibiotics, as if we bought them ourselves over the counter. So we've big problems, and fighting bacteria and a filthy food chain is yesterday's news, okay? Now we've got to think of more sensible ways, and we know the answer is moving back to the way things were being done, having these more natural farm practices where the cattle that are grass-fed have 300 times less salmonella inside them and that kind of stuff. Like obvious things that we should have been doing, but we ran away with ourselves a bit with monoculture and machinery and huge production, and and that worked.
All
Yeah,
money
and money.
driven.
Yeah, and it worked to a point. It was kind of cool, but now we've got like 50% of the organic milk sold in LA comes from cattle in CAFOs fed organic corn, and that's your organic milk. It's like, how does that mean organic? Organic pork from Spain is grown in the most horrific situation. So
Mhm.
we need to get back to basics and feeding normal food to our kids, to our dogs, and their food is meat, and they'll handle the bacteria perfectly fine as long as it's not some honking weird meat, which might be a bit dangerous. And we've got to take precautions and using local butchers. What happened to those guys? I mean, do you guys have a local butcher near you? We still have a butcher industry in Ireland a little bit, but I heard when you talk to anybody over the US, it's like, I don't have a butcher. It's like, I get my stuff in Whole Foods, or
Yep.
it's like there's nobody butchering their own animals anymore. So where do you get meaty bones? It's like, but I can't. It's like, oh,
It
okay.
is hard. It is hard for
Yeah.
yeah, it's very hard. Um, so anybody watching, do me a favor and comment below, more if you want to see more Dr. Connor Brady. Like, you are mesmerizing. We're getting close to the hour here, and I just have to say, I can't even explain to you how amazing you have been during this. Like, the way that you explain it, the content that you are sharing, like, this is fantastic. Like, this has been incredible so far. Like, you are completely, like, blowing my mind. Like, this is stuff I know, but the way that you share it, I just have to say, like, this is incredible.
Yeah,
Um,
thanks.
we didn't
Nice one.
even and we didn't even get to the things that we
Didn't
wanted to
get to
talk
any
about.
questions
I
there.
know
I told you we wouldn't. I
I
told you.
know we didn't get
Yeah.
to because I wanted to talk about pancreatitis. I wanted to talk about how diet impacts behavior, and really importantly, I wanted to talk about probiotics. But I also want to respect your time. So, let's plan. Let's do this.
I'm happy to go a bit more. If you want to pick one of those topics,
Um,
there's a
let's do it.
behavior, yeah, there's a behavior kind of course on my website, okay, and I'll give a reduction for the people that are watching, so they can just go and watch that. So I highly recommend you check out. My doctorate was on, by the way. You said I did a doctorate in nutrition. I did a doctorate studying the effects of nutrition on behavior and gut
Right.
morphology. I actually used deer in my test and then extrapolated out to group living animals. So that's what the doctorate was. So nutrition and behavior, I'm obsessed with it. And now I've gone back down that rabbit hole because of probiotics. And oh my god, it's so interesting. So I put together a kind of a seminar on my website, but it's good for me that you guys go that way and have a look at it. But I'll hand over a coupon that will get you in cheaper onto the website. It's only
Oh, and
20
I'll
bucks or
link it all
something.
below for you. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can pick another one of the tops, the pancreatitis one. Do you have to finish at an hour, or what are you?
No, I'm good. I just always, we just get to the hour and I don't want to overdo. I was going to say we
Yeah,
should have another live. We should schedule
yeah.
another one. But like
We do another
what?
one.
Let's talk a little bit about pancreatitis because I'm getting a lot of comments about that and I think that might be helpful for people right now.
Yeah, I think the pancreatitis thing is really, really important. I have
Yeah.
an article on my website that you can walk through it. I've given a chunk of my book out in that article to show you what I'm talking about in the studies. But most importantly, what you guys need to understand is that most of the pancreatitis, not all, I mean, pancreatitis is just inflammation of the pancreas. It doesn't tell you why it happened. Infections can cause a chemical insult, damaged back if you hit the lumbar, number 3, is it? And so different things can cause pancreatitis, but for sure, the number one cause in dogs, the vast majority is diet related. And people out there believe it's all fat. And unbelievably, it's not. So we have all the studies, thanks to Mark Roberts and a few other people, we have all the studies to show us that rather paradoxically, it's carbohydrates that fuels blood fat. And the way it works is quite simple. You feed lots of carbs to an animal, human or a dog, and the body goes, lovely, carbs, because carbs is like fast energy. It's petrol. It's like, oh yeah, let's burn this. And so it just keeps burning. You keep on feeding carbs to the dog and it keeps on burning carbs, 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 carbs. And while your body is mad focused on burning carbs, it's not burning any fat. And so what happens? Fat builds in the blood. That's simple. That's how fat builds in your dog's blood to a point that your pancreas bottles it and starts having a bit of a panic attack. And so that's pancreatitis. And suddenly you get an acute bout of pancreatitis as the blood triglycerides have gone too high. And while your dog is on that table suffering what is worse than a gunshot in the guts, I heard, it's your body digesting itself. I mean, think about that. Absolute agony. Inside your guts, visceral pains, you can't touch it. And you're a dog, you don't even have hands, so you just have to sit there and take it. So by the time they're on the table, then the vet will be helping out your dog, and the vet will say to you, "Did you give him a bit of sausage? Did you give him a bit of steak?" And unfortunately, for a lot of people, they'll say, "Yes, I gave him some sausage," and they'll go, "Well, I did tell you to just feed the dry food." So that's the bit that annoys me. It's like we have 4 studies out there showing it's because of high carbohydrate diets that dogs do way better when you take them off the carbohydrate diets. The blood fat drops. But the problem is, if your pancreas is stuttering, it's like the camel with the big heavy load. If the pancreas is stuttering and you give a dog a fatty meal, if you eat fat, it spikes the blood fat just momentarily, just a little blip, just like that. So if your pancreas is already about to go and you feed a bit of fat, yes, it might be the thing that triggers the pancreatitis. But the question is, what is wrong with your dog that he couldn't eat a sausage? I mean, bloody hell, sausage is the most normal dog food on the planet. Why can't he have a bit of sausage? So what put your dog on that table wasn't the fact that you gave him the sausage. It was the fact that your vet said feed high carbohydrate diet to the dog every single day. If that advice wasn't there, your dog could have as many sausages as you want. They're fat eating machines. Studies show they eat terrible amounts of fat when they're given the chance. in this feast or famine kind of thing that they have. So carbs are 100% the problem with pancreatitis. There's no doubt about it. So we know that in the throes of acute pancreatitis, if your dog is suffering, we just feed a very high protein meal if they want to eat it all. Cottage cheese, bloody lightly cooked turkey mince, whatever you want, but just that'll do you. A bit of broth, drink that. And then after that, during chronic pancreatitis, which 2/3 of healthy cats and dogs presenting a post-mortem, so they're killed by road accidents or whatever, 2/3 of those animals have pancreatitis by 7 years of age. 2/3 of them, as if Mother Nature just made this terrible mistake with the pancreas. So we know it's because 2/3 are eating high carbohydrate diets. So you've got to feed them raw. If your dog's in chronic pancreatitis or cat, please read my article on pancreatitis. Please know that raw dog food is essential in that situation. Any vet recommending high carbohydrate diets for a dog on pancreatitis, in chronic pancreatitis, is doing it very dangerously wrong. As wrong as recommending high carbohydrate diets for a dog with cancer. Those two things are unforgivable with everything we know today. You don't spike insulin in cancer, and you don't feed high carb diets to dogs in chronic pancreatitis. It's so important because so many people are suffering it and they're on the wrong food. So if you're going to feed raw, don't be feeding raw with lots of sweet potato and rice and stuff in it. It's a meaty diet for you in the future. Doesn't matter about the fat content.
Yeah, and I think to clarify, when you say high carbohydrate diet, that's really any kibble. So I
Yeah.
just want to clarify that. And my understanding with pancreatitis is that it's also tied to the way that the made, so that dogs diet, no problems. But it's again, when you get those high carbohydrates, like you said, and the more cooked fats that potentially can be problematic, which is again my understanding why a lot of people come to me and say, well, my vet is recommending a low fat kibble.
Mm.
And one of my thoughts behind that is probably because dogs may struggle, dogs that are already having pancreatitis issues, dogs may struggle with digesting cooked fats because if they're
Oh,
fed a
yeah.
high carb processed diet, they're not going to have the right enzymes or as much of the right enzymes to break down the
Yeah.
fats they
Yeah,
would
that's
that
good.
are readily available in a raw diet. So that's kind of my other thought pattern. What are your thoughts
Yeah,
on that?
I've heard the exact same thing. I haven't read anything in the literature, as if I'm placing less and less emphasis on that as time goes
Yeah.
on because I've no
Yeah.
faith in what I'm reading anymore. But I'm totally convinced by what you're saying there because too many smart people have said it, and I feel like I haven't read the thing that I was like, oh, I see the link there. So
Yeah.
something about the cooked fat seems to be a problem. Too many people with experience of pancreatic dogs have said that that might be an issue. So because I don't live in that land and only feed raw and the dogs are fine
Mm.
after it and that kind of seems to work for me. But you're the second person to say that to me now in a week or two, and I'm like chastising myself
Interesting.
in my head, going, "Yeah." I'm like, I need to know more about that. I've gone looking for that before, and I haven't found anything in the literature where they have been feeding. Certainly not the dogs. There's no studies in dogs. You just look at the studies in humans,
Yeah.
but I haven't found cooked meat fat diet studies or anything. Nothing solid yet, but if I'm going to go proper looking for that now because I really want to find out what that is. Too many people are saying it, so I'm sure cooked fat. There's something there that I'm missing. Maybe it's the enzymatic type stuff.
That's what
I'll
I'm
have a
thinking.
look.
That's
Yeah,
yeah, that's my thinking. I haven't seen anything, but it's kind of my thought around it when I'm thinking
cool,
about how enzymes work. So that's interesting.
cool.
And yeah, pancreatitis seems to be a very common issue. So okay,
Mm.
so let's say a dog, they have chronic pancreatitis. So basically what you're saying is if we can feed raw, great, or at least gently cooked, high meat, and
Hmm.
then avoid uh, obviously high carbohydrate diets. Are there
Yeah,
any, and then maybe some bone broth, no salt added,
yeah,
maybe some raw goat milk, for
yeah,
example, but
yeah,
any other suggestions of what
yeah.
digestive enzymes? I think
Yeah,
you've
supplements would
mentioned
be
that.
great. In the supplements line of things, the first one is actually pancreas. So pancreas is a fantastic addition now. It's hard to find you buy dry pancreas in a supplement. Ancestry is the name of the dried meat supplement dudes over in the US. But so if you can find dried grass-fed beef pancreas or usually pork pancreas, it's such a sloppy organ when you take it out of an animal. It's like that's an organ. It's just this gloop. But the pancreas is great because in the pancreas is everything you need. It's got all glucagon and digestive enzymes and cool stuff.
Mhm.
So you want a bit of that. Was that a cat or a dog or a
That was
person that
my
went through?
that was
Okay.
my I know it was my dog.
Oh, the
She's
dog. Okay.
yeah, she's in heat right now, so she's
Oh,
a little yeah, I know.
oh,
She's on
very
her first
exciting.
heat. I know. It's very
Okay.
exciting times.
I hope you've got a high fence. Have you got a high fence?
Yes, and we're
Yeah.
not doing walks right now, so when I
Okay.
go
Yeah.
out, even in the backyard, yeah, I keep it
Yeah.
safe
You want a
because
few puppies though, don't you? Come
no,
on, let's have
I
puppies.
don't
No?
no,
Oh,
I
so
am a
exciting.
responsible pet
Listen,
parent, trying to
look,
get
we're
her
having
yeah. It's
plenty pups.
interesting because she's a rescue, so
Yeah.
contractually, I have to get her spayed, but
Oh,
the rescue and I've volunteered with them long enough that I'm like, "Can you at least let me wait till she's 2? Like, let me
nice.
get her through a few heats.
Good on
Let
you.
me get her to at least 2 years old." And so contractually, I'm gonna have to
Yeah.
spay her, but we're waiting as long as we can.
That's cool. That's good. You're right. Yeah. So at a minimum, if you can, the pancreas hard to find. If you can't buy digestive enzymes, human type are fine, but there's pet ones as well. Not much difference between them, but whatever. Digestive enzymes to help the pancreas out. That's a good idea.
Yeah,
In fact, if your dog is really, really gut sick and putting out sloppy poos, and you can't really find
yeah.
out what it is, I would just throw digestive enzymes in, change nothing else, and put digestive enzymes in. And if your dog gets much better, 24 hours, 48 hours, the poos return to consistency, you know your dog's got EPI, which is another pancreatic insufficiency, which is another common kind of pancreatic issue. So you pop in the solution and see, does it work? And if it does, you know you've got pancreatitis. It's like popping in cortisone when you think you've got an adrenal issue or whatever. Anyway,
Mhm.
look, so the digestive enzymes is a good idea to help the pancreas out. Vitamin E is really important because you've got a fat in the blood issue, and vitamin E is the vitamin that's in control of all that. So you need to add in vitamin E to a dog with pancreatitis. That would be a really good benefit. An anti-inflammatory, any natural anti-inflammatory now, from fish oil, at a basic fish oil in capsules in a brown jar, 30 days worth. You know, that's the way you want to buy your fish oil, guys. We're keeping it too long in the fridge, and studies are showing you have a 50-50 chance of buying fish oil off the shelf in the US that's at its oxidation period. So as soon as you crack that lid, it's gone past the oxidation bit, which means it's adding more free radicals to your body than it's taking away. So the fish oil industry is pretty dark, guys. There's an awful
Yeah.
lot of nonsense. Blister packs are good. Capsules are best in a little jar. But fish oil is a good anti-inflammatory. Golden turmeric paste,
Mhm.
wonderful anti-inflammatory. You're trying to cool off the fire on the pancreas. So a natural addition, I like that. But most importantly, bit of digestive enzymes, vitamin E, they're my go-tos.
Fantastic. That's gonna help a lot of people.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna have to say, I'm gonna have to invite you back because there's way too much I didn't like, I want to jump in and go deep into probiotics and behavior and
Yeah, let's do it.
nutrition, and I know, let's do it. So, um, thank you for being here, and for anybody watching, please make sure you share this because I think this kind of content is going to help, thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of pet parents out there, and this is invaluable, information that Dr. Brady is sharing with us. I will have his course as well as his book and all of
Nice
his
one.
website and everything all linked down below. This is a must read. And what I like to do, and you probably don't, I don't think I've ever told you this, but when I come across a veterinarian in my city that is anti-raw, I will send them from Amazon your book,
Nice one.
as well as the Forever Dog. And or I'll just drop it off with a little bow on it and put it to the vet's name and just
Yeah.
hope that, one out of whatever 10 will actually,
Do you
read
think
it
they
and
will?
learn from it.
Yeah.
I
I
hope.
wonder. Yeah, I hope. That's a nice way to be. Nothing wrong with a bit of hope. It's funny,
Yeah.
like, it's kind of they kind of say, show us the science, show us the science. So you
Yeah.
accumulate the science and you show it to them, but then they don't read it, and it's on to the next thing. And it's like, oh, it's so frustrating because, but the young vets are coming. The young vets are coming to the
Yep.
page, help us out. They're joining Raw Feeding Veterinary Society. So you can see it's changing a bit. You're talking to first year, second year, third. Oh my God, Connie, you should hear what I heard in the lecture today. And it's like, I'm loving this, So it's clearly, you can't keep it off social media. So this is a massive move, and there's millions and millions of dogs being fed this food without the support of the veterinary industry. So the old Jim Morrison line, they've got the guns, but we've got the numbers. The thing is, it's always about the market, and we've always got the power. And it's like, all you got to do is just feed your dog real food for a week and tell me you want to go back to kibble. Like, you just see the difference in the dog. If you're a behavior nut, you'll see behavior change. If you're a groomer, you're going to see the code change, and you just feed it for a week and kind of go, I can do this, and I'm not going to mess this up any worse than I'm messing up my own diet. And we are messing up our own diets. We're all deficient in bits and bobs.
Of
Life is
course.
too short, their life particularly, to be worrying about that sort of stuff, you know. I let my dog lick the ice cream tub. You know, life is too short. He's
Yep.
95% perfect and 5% bad. And you know, I think we'd all like to be like that. So, you know,
I love it.
it's just, yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Moderation, moderation. Okay,
Yeah.
well, this was fantastic. I'm so honored to have you here, and I'm even more honored to be able to learn from you and connect with you personally. Like it's such an incredible opportunity. So, with that, I'm going to end here. Thank you everybody for joining. Again, don't forget to share, subscribe, and check the links for Dr. Brady.